Okay, welcome to another Journey on My Mind. We're so glad you've decided to join us for another Journey Short. It's Dave and Kevin Day today, along with all the sirens.
I know.
Uh-huh.
This is the day of tornado sirens.
Yes, it is. But hey, no tornadoes yet. No worries. A little thunder, a little lightning.
So
I'd let you talk about the weather last time. I'm talking about it this
you let
time.
me talk about the weather. How gracious
I know.
are you?
And we are on the topic of resilience.
Yeah.
Which is in need of great encouragement in our current culture. I find resilience is waning.
Yeah, we said last time it's in short supply. We're in a time of anxiety. People are stressed and anxious. They're polarized. We need to be more resilient individually and corporately. So last time we talked about individual resilience.
Yeah.
And there is even more to talk about with that. But there are some particular things. Some of them are a little bit counterintuitive.
Right.
And this time we wanted to talk about becoming more resilient as a church community.
Yeah. Yep.
And so we'll talk not just locally about this church, but really broadly about
Culturally, or-
what is,
Are we talking culturally or worldly?
well, either.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's like what are the hallmarks of a resilient church community?
Right.
And what are the practices of that?
Yeah. And I think that is what I find to be true, just as a general statement, is churches in general are pretty resilient. Speaking of which,
Are you getting alerts?
I'm getting an emergency alert.
As we talk. See, I turned my alerts off. I learned how to do it at 4:30 a.m. because it was going off every 20 minutes.
It's a flash flood warning.
Okay.
That's okay.
So, by the way,
we're good
if
here.
we get swept away,
Yes.
it'll make for fantastic video.
YouTube video.
It will be viral.
Yes, it will
So,
be.
in that sense, it'll be worth it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just keep watching. And we should have water just
Right? Just cascading in.
We're resilient. We are resilient.
We'll just float on down.
Float, and we'll just keep talking as we float. What I found, and this is, I had a mentor early in my ministry days who said to me, he goes, "There's two things that are really, really hard to kill in the world." And I was like, my first impulse, I thought lions, bears, grizzly bears,
Right.
and
Voldemort.
He was referring to organizations, and he said educational institutions and churches. And I said, okay, I'll bite. Why is that? And he said, because for education, this is an old principle. I'm not sure it's true anymore. They're not in it for the money, and they will work at it for a principled core value. Okay. And he said, for churches, he said, God's involved, and you can't somehow quantify that in an organization's resilience or ability to maintain its existence. And I was like, okay. So as we lean into this idea of the first principle, I would say, if it's not a Jesus-centered community, it won't be resilient.
Okay.
And I don't mean just like some are like Bible-based, like their resiliency then is built into a code or a mantra or a doctrinal statement. In a Jesus-centered community, it is built into a relational orientation towards a person who we follow. So it's a different orientation. It's a different direction. So if everything goes south and it goes against my mantra or goes against my code of ethics or it goes against my doctrine, I become unsettled. I become less resilient. But if my focal point is the relational aspect between me and God based in who God is and who Jesus is, I have a tendency then to go towards the center more when bad things happen as opposed to away from it.
All right.
So resiliency is built in this. It's not in a sphere of truths. It's in a relational peace that I get because I know that I'm in relationship with the one that's in the center.
And that's probably fundamentally different than how we all grew up within the church. Which
it's fundamentally different.
About
yes.
These truths are the things that sort of bind us and hold us together.
Yeah.
And when those things get either challenged or blown up, then you get blown up. Right. And if it's more relational, then that has more, that sticks harder.
Yeah. A lot of people who come to Journey Church have found that principle that you just spoke of, that my core tenets that I believed got challenged. I didn't know what to do now, and so I walked away.
Right.
Because I didn't have an answer for the question that people were asking me. Simple one would be, you mean to tell me that you believe that that the earth and all that's in it was made in 7 days? And if you grew up in a culture that said, yes, absolutely, and if you don't believe that, then you're a heretic, you can't belong, and somebody comes along and says, I think I've got empirical truth that says that it wasn't. What do I do?
Right.
What do I do? Because I'm a reasoned person. I'm going to listen to that conversation. We don't.
It puts you in a bad place.
It does. And there are a number of those things that I was taught growing up that I had to come to grips with, that maybe these empirical truths that I were taught really aren't, and that really this is about something else. And it's okay. I really don't care if people believe that the earth was created in 7 days or a million years. It's not empirical. It's not foundational for me any longer as to whether I believe in Jesus.
Yeah. Good. Love that.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this too, and I would add 5 or 6 little bullet points, and I don't feel like we have time to dig into each one.
Okay, I'll stop.
So no, I think that was great. I'll just fling them out there, and then we can pick at them a little bit.
Let's do it.
Okay. So as I was thinking about and I've actually dug into a little bit of research on this too. So it's not just something rattling around in Dave's little pea brain. And
big brain.
Man, not really. My head's so tiny it can't have but such a big brain in it. We joke that
hard to find hats that fit.
There's Jupiter and then the Earth, and you can put like however many Earths inside Jupiter. That's how I feel like Ellen's head and my head are. Like I feel like 1,000 of my heads could fit inside. Not that she has a giant head. I just have a little tiny head.
Good save.
Anyway,
good save there.
But we digress.
Yes.
So here's what I've been thinking about, learning about, is that if I had to give 5 or 6 either characteristics or practices for a resilient church.
Yeah.
The first is really coattailing on what you said, and that is there is relational focus and depth.
Yes.
It's focused on relationship, first with Jesus, and then with the community.
Yes, with each other.
With each other. And there's the ability to have the depth that absorbs difference, that absorbs potential disagreements. And the focus is more on the integrity of the relationship than on the being right.
Right.
So that's number one.
Yeah.
Number 2 is that you would tend to have more mature leaders. And I mean, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually mature. So moving on.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Numerically. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
No. And
there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And we could talk more about what that looks like for real, because I think what we bought as mature, spiritually mature leadership in the past, I think we would push against that now.
We would.
The third is that really healthy faith communities normalize and make room for lament. It's not just all about victory and positive things and everything good and some outcome being the way we want it to be. It's an acknowledgement that we exist in a world that is sad at times and broken all the time and all of that. So that'd be the third. The fourth is that there would be a tendency to focus more on certain practices or spiritual disciplines over programs. Practices over programs. That it would be less about all these sort of niche programs and more about like the corporate practice of Lord's Supper or
Right.
whatever the spiritual discipline or ritual would be.
That's great.
We talked about this last time, but there would be a focus on serving outside of yourself, pulling outside, not just becoming really good with, hey, we're great with each other and this is a nice little nest, but really going outside of that and serving.
Yeah.
The last thing I'd say is I think resilient church communities understand and tell in a repetitive way the story of God's faithfulness.
Right.
So that we're just awful at remembering. We're awful. We read, the Old Testament and we're like, the Israelites, they're so stupid, right? This amazing thing just happened. And then like a chapter later, they're like doubting God and all that. They're so,
building idols.
so stupid.
Yeah.
We're exactly the same way.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, God really showed up. God did some powerful stuff. And then a month later, a twist in the story, and it's like, is God even there?
Yeah, is
and
he real?
Is God's distant?
Yep.
It's so hard for us to hold that. And so I think really putting out there the story of God's faithfulness in a way that is just constantly sort of being held out as real and true.
Right. And I think resilience comes when you're with a group of people that you can share that with, because I think that story is incredible. I think the story of God helps with resilience, but I also think it is how has that story impacted Dave? How has it impacted Kevin? And we can speak into each other's lives in that relational way that you start. They're all tied together around that idea. Yeah. If the community isn't tied together in that way, it won't be resilient.
Correct.
And what you will find is people will splinter and go away. It happens in all churches. It happens when somebody encounters something they don't agree with in the community, and somebody says, "Hey, you ought to invest more of your time. You ought to invest more of energy into the community, and you will find what you're looking for." And they usually, if they don't want to engage in that way, will go to a different church.
Absolutely.
Because they really don't want to invest themselves. And if you don't want to invest yourself, you're attending church, you're not in church.
Right.
And there's a big difference. And so there's a lot of those people around the periphery of all churches.
And this is another conversation, but that consumer mindset about churches has really been detrimental. And so we have this idea that church is a commodity that we go to, and if it's meeting our needs, it's great. And if it's not, we'll go elsewhere and get the need met.
Right.
So it's like, well, if this store isn't carrying the product I want, we'll go to another store. Same mindset. Yeah. And it's very detrimental because it flies in the face of this idea that church is ultimately a community of relationships. It's not about programs or whether or not you sing the hymns of the faith or this or that. I have a relative, I'll say, that older relative, that their church got all crazy about the new pastor moved a commemorative railing and they lost their minds. Yes. Right. But that's what happens if you start looking at church as being different than what it's really about.
Oh yeah. Yep. And when I've been pastoring for a long time, and I happened to get to pastor during a season of worship wars, we call them.
Yeah, right.
What do you mean we're not going to sing a hymn today? Well, we're not going to sing a hymn today. That's what I mean by that. I don't mean anything other than we're not going to sing a hymn today. Well, we sing hymns in this church. Well, yeah, we do, just not today. Okay. But the amount of emotional attachment to something of historical significance for somebody, where you want to bring in a relational component to it and say, you know what, there's other people that like different kinds of music, and we need to kind of not marry our music style. We should just date it. But
the point you're making that ties to this very strongly is that makes the point that if your church is built around this sort of consumer mindset, or what is it for me, or what do I want, or it is fundamentally different, and it is a much more fragile, less resilient community.
Because the resilience is built into the history.
It's built into all those things rather than built into the fundamental basis of relationship. Yeah. So that's I think we've really historically done ourselves a massive disservice.
Yeah, I agree.
So this is a way of being more resilient now, is to realign with relationship in the authentic sense with Jesus and with each other.
Right. And let's pick at that leadership thing for just a second. How much time we got? Okay. Let's just pick at that. You stated,
there was no subtext.
No subtext.
No, you go for it. Wherever you want to go with that.
Culturally in the past, leadership in a church was strong, authoritative.
Yes.
You submit to the leadership in ways that is unquestioned. I remember my first high school conflict with a pastor, and I was brought in. I was told I'm not allowed to question him. I was told I was not allowed to, in any form or fashion, undermine his authority, especially in front of other teenagers. I was 16, and I was very confused because I knew what he was doing was very wrong. And so I remember going home, explaining this to my parents, and my parents siding with the pastors, because that's the way it works. You've got to submit to authority. I said, even when authority is wrong, well, we don't want to cause any waves. We don't want to. That was my first step to.
That was a while ago.
This was a while ago.
It was a good 80 plus years ago.
Yes, it was. It was my first moment when I went, maybe this isn't true.
Yeah, right.
Because
this being the
whole thing, the whole church thing, the whole thing is broke. I never questioned whether Jesus was real.
Yeah.
I always questioned whether or not the church was crazy or not.
Yeah. I don't think I did until I was an adult. I don't think I did until a decade ago.
But
so I'm a little slow on the uptake. But when I got there, I really got there.
Yeah,
like
you
I
did.
was really like, wow,
something's broke.
Yeah, massive.
Yeah. And the unquestioned authority of anybody, in my opinion, undermines this idea of resiliency, undermines the idea of what a true community looks like. There has to be the ability to be able to question leadership. There has to be able to be a conversation that says, maybe this isn't right. And in the leadership's court is this idea that we could be wrong.
Yeah.
And if there isn't that, we could be wrong, then there's no means by which to enter into some kind of dialogue about whether or not, and can people hold competing views and still be a part of the community? And in a lot of those leadership dominant environments, they cannot.
Oh, for sure not.
They cannot.
Yeah, I think a lot of evangelical culture has been built on the cults of personality. The historically, especially recent history, let's say from the 80s forward, the evangelical,
which is how long I've been in the church.
Right, yeah. It's the model is the teaching or lead pastor has to be this fit, attractive, charismatic person, and then everyone aligns behind them, and it really is a cult of personality.
Right.
And there's no room for that to be disputed.
Right.
And it's more about allegiance to that than it is about allegiance to a deeper relationship with
and
with each other and
with Jesus. Right.
That's what.
And so when I in my first pastorate ended up challenging the lead pastor because he violated his own rules. I mean, he literally, he was the founding pastor. He wrote the rules. He wrote this is how it works. And he manipulated the rules in his favor in order to get somebody into leadership that wasn't qualified, yada, yada, yada. And I was like, you can't do that. Guess who was looking for a new job?
Right. It wasn't him.
Nope, it was me. And so because I couldn't. It was this, you have to be willing to, and so hopefully what we try to do is hold that stuff really loosely.
Absolutely. And I feel that here, to be honest. I don't think I could exist without it being that.
I know I couldn't.
Exist here.
Right.
I definitely feel that. And back to kind of our main premise is that is part of a larger church community that is resilient.
Yes.
It isn't built around the personality. It isn't built
Right.
around the authority structure
Right.
and the authoritarian or authoritative
Right.
kind of presence. It's built around the relational pieces of it.
And the argument against that I've heard over and over again, then you have a weak church. And I would argue every time I've seen the fall of one of those guys, whether they leave the church, whether they do something wrong or whatever, the church crumbles. The resiliency goes with that person.
Yep, I would agree. And it brings up how the church has really co-opted this idea of strength and weakness being more of a world-defined concept than the way it really is, or should be.
Which is sad.
Rock on.
Well, welcome to church. Journey on my mind. Out.